Thank you everybody for staying with us for this first afternoon session. So my name is Natalia Vazquez from IFREMER and Gundula from Deltares, and we'll be hosting this panel discussion entitled More Than One Basin. I don't need to tell you because I think most of you have participated, but before this general conference on sea level, we had 4 workshops that were directed to 4 separate basins, a little artificial, I guess, of the oceans bathing Europe. We had a workshop on the North Sea and the Arctic Ocean that Gundula hosted, another one on the East Atlantic that I hosted, a third one on the Mediterranean Sea and the Black Sea, and one on the Baltic Ocean. And in those workshops, we actually tried to summarize the state of the art of the knowledge on sea level rise, as well as the knowledge gaps for each of these regions, and also the impacts that are acting preferentially on these regions and the pertinent adaptation policies. The main issues of these workshops are summarized in the booklet that you got, that's downstairs, and you got when you got your registration. But we thought it would be interesting as well to have a panel discussion where we'll summarize the exchange between the different basins. As one of the speakers said this morning, sea level rise is not a one-country issue, so we need to talk across countries and across different basins. So we have also tried to represent different levels of management of policymaking. We have people from the local management as representatives from the city of Barcelona, 2 people from the ministry in the Netherlands, and they will all be giving their ideas on the policy priorities and states on their different regions and how do you say it? Sorry. And their activities, sorry. We have 4 speakers and 1 online. Iryna Makarenko, I don't know if we can have her in. Hello, Iryna, can you hear us?
Yes, hi Natalia.
Hello, thanks for being there. Without further ado, I'll just ask each of you to introduce yourselves and to give us your pitch on the policy strategy of your regions. We can start maybe with Lucia. You're there on the board. Thanks.
Thank you very much and good afternoon. My name is Lucia Cuesta and I came from Barcelona City Council, and more specifically from the Strategic Office for the Coast of Barcelona. Our main scope of action is all the coast of the city, not only beaches but harbors, maritime promenade, and also the neighborhoods of Barcelona. And Barcelona, it's more, the coastal of Barcelona, it's more or less similar like a patchwork, because it has different spaces with different needs. And that's why was born this specific office in the Barcelona City Council, because it was needed an integration vision focusing only in the coast. And that's why I'm here. And focusing on the adaptation policies, Barcelona has a commitment with climate change and also to be a more resilient coastal city. We have several instruments, plans, and actions that are a fact right now. And I want to highlight 2 of them. One of them is the Climate Emergency Action Plan. It's a 10 years plan, and it identifies several actions in the climate change in Barcelona. And it detects that protect the coastline is one of our priorities, and the sea level rise, it's one of our problems, as well as the floatings, erosion, coastal retreat, and more extreme events. The second plan is the Strategic Coastal Plan of Barcelona. It also takes 10 years of development, this plan, and identifies 65 different projects around the coast of Barcelona. And I want to focus in the beaches because the beaches of Barcelona has a very strong eroded behavior with a low capacity of recovery. We have a loss of sand around 30,000 meter cubics per year, and that's a huge problem. And the plan of Barcelona give us some recommendations about it. That's why now I focus the speech and where we're doing right now and where we expectations for the next years. Right now we are coastal monitoring. We have twice a year we have a bathymetry. We have pictures of the beach. Each hour we have an image of Barcelona coastline, which provides a very valuable data to work in several aspects, not only in physics, but with people. For example, because of COVID situations, we could use that data to make carrying capacity control tools. We have also indicators. For example, in this strategic coastal plan, we ask for a balanced sediment in the beaches, and they recommend us to have an alarm system of the weight of our beaches. We have also indicators of quality of emergent pollutants and other ones. We have studies. In last years, we developed specific studies of the impacts and risk that climate change could have in Barcelona city. Also the ecosystem services that provide the coastal zones. And last year we developed a really interesting study group with 10 experts of different disciplines to focus on the future of the Barcelona beaches, to have criteria, to have recommendations for the future, because the beaches of tomorrow are not similar of today. And I want to finish to some headlines of our priorities for the next 10 years, more or less. It was finishing the stabilization works in Barcelona, sound management, breakwater repairs in the 3 harbors of Barcelona, finishing finally the Barcelona Maritime Promenade. We have also, without finishing, one big part of the Barcelona Promenade, and it's an opportunity because now we can put climate change recommendations and resilience and working in a different way. We also work with adaptive management. For example, this summer we start to put bar beaches that was during a lot of time in the sand. We relocate that uses to the promenade, and also we construct some beach volley areas, very useful and very demanded, but not in the sand because it's very valuable for us. And final, we work with stakeholders. For example, we are it's not signed the agreement, but we are close to sign an agreement and a strategy, work together, the city and the harbor, the big harbor of Barcelona. We have several confrontations, and we hope that working together in a strategy is very helpful for the city. And just to finish, the governance, working with the governance of the beachfront, with people, with a lot of participation processes. And that's why communication tools are very, very appreciated for us. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Lucia. That was already very interesting and connecting the dots of a lot of things that we heard over the last 1.5 days. The importance of monitoring and data to develop indicators, the stakeholder engagement, the importance of that, different planning methods that you show us how to put it into practice. Thank you. And you already mentioned your collaboration with ports, so I would like to ask Begoña to introduce yourself and tell us where you are at with adaptation and what your priorities are for the future.
Okay, hello, thank you for the invitation to be in this panel discussion. I am a physical oceanographer. I work as head of a harbor oceanography department for the Spanish Ports Agency, where I manage the sea level monitoring composed of 41 stations that measure sea level, waves, meteorological parameters, and the sea level forecasting system for the Spanish ports. And I have worked for more than 30 years in operational oceanography in general, and also in the design and implementation of early warning systems, with a focus specifically on coastal sea level hazards. And just to finish my introduction, I am particularly interested in understanding the sea level processes at different time scales and their contribution to offset impacts due to climate change. So with respect to the adaptation policy and the main priorities from the point of view of the Spanish ports, I will start by indicating that in September 2020, the Spanish government approved the second a national climate change adaptation plan for the decade, which aims to be a guiding framework for the design and implementation of any mitigation or adaptation initiatives in the country in response to the risks and threats of climate change. So aligned with this national objective, the ports of Spain and the Spanish harbor authorities in general have now included in their strategic plan the development of a climate change adaptation plan specific for the ports. The objective of this plan is to ensure the operability of the physical elements and the critical assets, of course, of the port, on the one hand, but also to ensure, to be able to anticipate and have an efficient reaction in case of a downtime, disruption of services, or a delay in the operational services. So the aim of this strategic plan is that we should have an adaptation plan defined for the ports, for each port of the Spanish port system by 2025. And these plans should be implemented in principle by 2030. That's the objective we have in mind. We are starting now. As a starting point, I have to mention that in the framework of an Interreg-Sudoe project named Eclipse, we have started with the application of a methodology of adaptation of ports to climate change published in 2020 by the World Association for Waterborne Transport Infrastructure, the PIANC. And this methodology is now being applied to 3 case studies in the Sudoe region, which are the ports of Valencia in Spain, Aveiro in Portugal, and Bordeaux in France. Based on this first experience, the idea is that this PIANC methodology, that is our starting point, should be extended progressively to the rest of the Spanish port system. This methodology considers 4 basic stages for those that don't know this document, which are, first of all, the port characterization and the definition of objectives. This requires a strong connection with the port authorities and the personnel in the harbors to understand their needs, to make an inventory of critical assets, etc. The second stage relates to compilation of climate information that may be relevant for that particular port. The third step is to provide vulnerability and risk assessments. And the fourth one is the development of a portfolio of potential adaptation measures that could be implemented following an adaptive approach, taking into account the long-term planning and of course, the uncertainties. As you probably know, between the recommendations and requirements of the PIANC document, of course, we find oceanographic meteorological data collection, for example, and also other kind of data. Of course, in that sense, this activity has been successfully accomplished by the ports of Spain and by the Spanish Harbor Authority in Madrid for more than 30 years now. We have observational networks that measure sea level, waves, currents, temperature, and salinity, with time series spanning, in some cases, up to 30 years already. And we have also operational models running at coastal and harbor scales for all our harbors. All these data, in fact, are integrated in a visualization and early warning, in a visualization tool and early warning system which is named Portus, and also in a dashboard named CMA that integrates for each specific port additional tools and downstream services that facilitate taking decisions to the operators of the harbor and decision makers. I also would like to conclude here about the roadmap we have in Puertos del Estado, just mentioning that our most immediate action along the next months is, for example, to work on the design and implementation of an observatory of coastal impacts. Impacts in the ports, not coastal, because we are focused on the policy in the ports. So we are starting to work on that, and we hope to have a first prototype ready, based on the experience with Valencia, available by the end of Eclipse project that I mentioned before. And I think this more or less summarizes the planning in mind and the strategy and roadmap in the ports of Spain. I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Begoña, and also thank you for highlighting its adaptation is not just up to governments, but also to private sector. And I would like to invite Glenn to tell us about adaptation in Ireland.
Thank you very much, Gundula. I'd like to apologize in advance. I don't normally sound like Marlon Brando. This is very unusual. Most of the time, I don't need a microphone, in fact. So I apologize, and I hope you can stick with me. Sound like a mafiosi, maybe. Yeah? I'm a physical oceanographer based at the Marine Institute in Galway, in Ireland, responsible for oceanographic and climate services. I also worked for a few years on the development of operational oceanography at European level in the Eurogoose office in Brussels. My work involves combining observations, models, satellite output, and many other things besides to inform short-term decisions, things like search and rescue, harmful algal bloom, forecasts, decisions in aquaculture and shipping and so on, and then longer-term planning as well in the climate area. So we have an adaptation plan in Ireland. We have what they call a national adaptation framework. The good news is it's now underpinned by legislation, so we have a very, very strong basis for this adaptation framework. It's done by sector. There are 12 different industrial sectors that are represented in the adaptation framework. One of them is for the seafood sector, which I'll talk about in a moment. But as well as the 12 sectoral adaptation plans, there are 31 local authority adaptation plans. So that's for every major county in Ireland. So this is in the legislation that every county has to produce an adaptation and a mitigation plan, both under the National Adaptation Framework. Just to give an example of how the seafood sector one works, there are probably 5 or 6 main areas that we're focused on. We're looking at fish distribution and abundance and how that might change over time. We're looking at ocean acidification and the implications for shellfish aquaculture. We're looking at harmful algal blooms and again the impact they have on living resources. Critical infrastructure, which is where sea level rise comes in. How will ports, seafood processing plants, landing facilities be affected by climate change over time? And a major pillar of our adaptation framework in seafood is actually around ocean literacy, about communicating climate science, ocean climate science to members of the public, to municipalities who have no expertise in this area to begin with. And unlike Begoña mentioned, a longer term plan that extends over 10 years, we have a sense of urgency in Ireland, not that they don't in Spain, but we have an urgency that suggests we have to have a climate action plan every 2 years. So we're working on the 2023 one right now. There are many, many hundreds of actions in this plan. It goes right the way up to the highest level in government for scrutiny. So if you put an action in the plan, it'll be scrutinised pretty much by our Prime Minister or somebody he designates. So it's taken very, very seriously because we have very serious emission targets and very serious targets in terms of adaptation as well. So over the last couple of years, I've spent a lot of time talking about what Jason Lowe and Lisa earlier on mentioned, talking to users, understanding the diversity of user needs, right from a government policymaker to a person who runs a port, to a finfish farmer in the very remote parts of southwest Ireland, and trying to understand how we as a national institute can produce climate information in a way that all of these people can consume and use that information. So I look forward to the discussion and I hope that's useful by way of background. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. That's also a very interesting perspective. the communication with stakeholders. And I would like to move on to the Netherlands and invite Quirijn. Lodder.
Hi all, and thanks for the invitation. My name is Quirijn Lodder. I work at the Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management in the Netherlands. We're actually split, so we have an operational part and a policy part. I work at the operational part, but large part of my work is advising on policy, long-term policies. And for adaptation policy in the Netherlands, it's really important that we have our policy primarily focused on risks. So the first step is deciding on which risks would you accept as a society, and then if these are set, those are set politically, and then adaptation comes in place. And climate change, sea level rise is a really important aspect of that, but firstly we try to translate it to changes in risks, and then most importantly for the Netherlands obviously is the risk of flooding. Major parts of the Netherlands are flood prone, and at the political level this is set at a probability of maximum once in 100,000 per year of dying due to flooding. So the aim is to keep those flood risks at the same level while adapting to sea level rise. And we're doing that through a national program on investments on flood defenses. And the aim is to have that completed in 2050. And at the moment, the benchmarks for that are also set on 2050, including the expected sea level rise and societal changes up to then. So that's phase one. It's a continuous investment in actually balancing flood risks. The second part of it is that we have by nature an erosional coast, and erosion in the Netherlands in the end leads to flooding of the whole of the country. So we aim basically for a whole of our coast to nourish it, to feed it with the sands, so it can accommodate sea level rise. And basically, if we have the coast and the land, we want both. If the sea comes up, we want the land to come up as well, especially then the dunes and the active coastal zone. And this links a lot to what Arjen told. So to summarize, that would be the main strategy, and that's encapsulated in a national strategy, which is developed in the Delta program, but it's made official in something which is called the National Water Program. And the National Water Program and the Delta program, they are updated every 6 years. So every 6 years, this update, we try to bring in as much as new insights as possible from IPCC, in the future, hopefully the Knowledge Hub. And we do studies like has been shown by Gu on what-if studies. So not assigning a probability to a future sea level rise, but given a certain sea level rise, independent on when and how probable it is, what would be the effects, so that you get the possibility to adapt when needed. And by working in 6-year cycles, we know that we have at least 6 years formal political decision making on the strategy for the coming decades. So that's at least an important part to force political awareness every couple of years. I was asked here to reflect also from the North Sea Basin. So I would like to highlight a bit on the neighboring countries. Most of them, especially the ones that have flood-prone polders, like Belgium, Germany, and Denmark. In essence, they apply the similar strategies. They have different definitions on risks, different definitions on what's acceptable, but that's not due to science, but due to how society works and what is deemed most important. And then I would like to finalize, since we're having a lot of discussions here also on nature-based solutions. We try to embed nature-based solutions as much as possible in our work, but it's not a objective upfront. We try to have a societal process when you have adaptation, and by linking stakeholders and options, there can be hard solutions, there can be soft solutions, or hybrids. And as a key point, giving this option somehow nature-based solutions are very much often chosen, and not so much by specialists like me, but by the stakeholders who live in these areas. And so that's a nice lesson, I would say. And that's for now, I would say.
Yeah, thank you, Quirijn, for explaining the adaptation landscape in the Netherlands. And it's also very interesting to hear how science on a 6-year cycle feeds into the political decision-making process. That's very interesting to hear. Yeah, and then I would like to invite Iryna, who is joining us online today from the Black Sea Commission on Pollution. Would you please introduce yourself and tell us what you are doing on adaptation, where you're at, and where you would like to go, what the priorities are.
Thank you very much, Gundula. Thank you, Natalia. Apologies for these technical mistakes because I'm eventually joining you on my phone because my computer doesn't want to obey. Good afternoon to all, and it's a great pleasure to join your conference, and especially this dedicated session with the regional dimension. As it was said, my name is Iryna Makarenko. I work for the Black Sea Commission's Permanent Secretariat, which is a regional sea convention for the Black Sea. And we are based in Istanbul, in Turkey. So, of course, no doubt that the topic of our today's discussion is on the agenda of all our European regional seas. So you could hear my colleagues, and it's very nice to see colleagues from other basins. So regarding our efforts in the Black Sea Commission, we have been collecting much data, and I wouldn't say that climate change is on our agenda since the beginning, and it is still not in all our documents, but at the same time we have been dealing with different so-called climate-related indicators in our activity, and the sea level rise is actually one of the indicators which is being annually reported by the members of the Black Sea Commission, which means 6 Black Sea riparian countries. And we also have a dedicated advisory groups dealing with these issues. It is the so-called ICZM group, which stands for Integrated Coastal Zone Management Group. So, as I mentioned, we have been collecting the data, and it's not only the sea level rise for the Black Sea, but also we collect the data on precipitations, we collect data on the number of floods, and also the average temperature. So this is all we managed to put on the agenda, and you know, we also have this data collected and stored in our regional pollution database. This pollution database is located in Ukraine, in Odessa. And, you know, also we have been collecting the data and publishing it in the scientific publication called The State of the Black Sea Environment. It is happening every 5 years, so now we are a bit outdated. The latest report was in 2014. So that was all the positive news, and of course, as other regions, and I would say maybe more than other regions, we have different challenges and also the needs. And I think here, because as far as I understand, your event is dealing with what could be the result of using the knowledge hub for the sea level rise, and I would say that for us it's going to be a of crucial importance, and it can be also extremely useful for all other European regions, I'm sure. And it may also help us not only to feed the data into our databases, but also to contribute to the harmonization of our efforts. Because as you may also heard, now all our 4 European regional seas are trying to get together and harmonize all the work that is being done in different regions. And this, of course, relates to identification of different parameters, different baselines, and of course, indicators. So here I would like to mention that we have special arrangements, and one of our closest partner is the UNEP-MAP Barcelona Convention, so our colleagues from Mediterranean Sea. We have Memorandum of Understanding, and we have been dealing with different issues, including the ICZM issues, including the climate change, and of course the sea level rise included. And so we also trying to have a deeper relationship with OSPAR and HELCOM. And last but not least, we participate in the global processes, not only European. And here I mean the work of the UN global group on indicators, and also the work which is being done by UN in terms of elaboration of the World Ocean Assessment tool. So that's why the work that you have been doing is very useful for us, and it serves as a real instrument for us to adapt the strategies, for us to collect necessary data, and also to monitor the sea level rise on the regional level, and also to contribute to the global efforts. So I think, because I'm not sure if you hear me well and everything is fine, I may stop here and also contribute to further questions if you have.
Thanks a lot, Iryna. We could hear you very well here in the audience. Thanks a lot. Thanks also for highlighting your view on the Knowledge Hub, on harmonizing efforts across Europe. I think this is a very, very nice goal that you formulated there. I have a couple of questions to the panel before opening a Q&A for the audience. So Begoña, I would like to start with you. You said you want to have plans ready by 2025 and implemented by 2030. What would you say, how could the Knowledge Hub sea level rise help you or similar actors in achieving these goals?
Well, okay. I think I have several points in mind that I think it would be useful for the planning and the roadmap in the ports of Spain. I would start, for example, for having some input that would help to identify those ports along our coast that are most exposed to the sea level rise, and in order to define which of them require more urgent actions with respect to this variable, because our planning, adaptation planning, refers to not only to sea level, but to other type of parameters. We consider that it would be also important to have an update on the availability of sea level rise projections with enough spatial resolution to deal with the problems and the challenges of the harbor. We consider, for example, access to high-quality vertical and movement information would also be interested. We have stations that monitor sea level and also the vertical and movement, and it would be good to have an assessment of the quality of these data, because I think the subsidence in some cases can be a contributor to the problems. Another example could be the recommendations on, or perhaps a methodology or a strategy for downscaling projections for different variables by means of dynamic models or by means of statistical methods. I think that it would be interesting to have some recommendations on that point. Finally, I think for the ports it's particularly important to identify and understand well the influence of the sea level rise on the changes of the wave regime or the agitation inside the harbor, which is a very critical variable for harbor operations. I think more or less that summarizes the ideas that came to my mind that it could be good to have from this report.
Thank you, Begoña, and I have been taking notes, so we can take that along. And I also have another question to Quirijn. You already reflected on commonalities across the North Sea basin, and you highlighted flooding and erosion as two impacts you're dealing with in the Netherlands. And we heard these days that these are impacts that a lot of countries across Europe deal with. Where do you see potential after these 1.5 days and the discussions that we had for collaboration across the Knowledge Hub and across basins?
Thanks a lot for the question. Yeah, I work quite a lot internationally, and you see that especially agencies They have their own local adaptation. So it's collaboration wouldn't be, in my perspective, wouldn't be so much on trying to find the ultimate adaptation route, because it will be different per area. But there are communalities that are, I would really welcome if the knowledge hub can add to that. And that is, for instance, I wrote down monitoring sea level rise. Even though that we all have tidal gauges, it's actually not that straightforward to get sea level rise out of it. And we do see differences at the border, which is interesting. Sediment budget monitoring, especially those coasts like the Netherlands that don't have bedrock, it's key that we actually understand where sediment is going, where it's coming from, and what the deficit is due to sea level rise. And that's also a thing which I would highly hope to do that in collaboration with neighboring countries. And then just for learning is we all do impact assessments, and we don't have to do the same impact assessment, but if you are looking into how does your neighbor do the impact assessment, you're probably going to be inspired for yourself. So that's the next thing. And for me, the Knowledge Hub would then be primarily, hopefully, inspiration on these kind of topics.
Thank you, Quirijn. We definitely took notes on that as well. With that, I would like to open the questions to the audience. Are there any questions to our panel? Yes, please, Thorsten.
Right. So this was a very enjoyable panel for me, and it reflects that it's much more fun to start with action at a local or a regional level. But okay, so that just as a observation. My question is, what kind of time horizon for sea level rise do you look at? To say whether it's planning a promenade in Barcelona, or adjusting your harbors, or developing an adaptation strategy in Ireland or the Black Sea, or adjusting your infrastructure. Is it that you look at 2050 or 2100, or actually even further? Because sea level rise is going to be a continuum. It might hopefully level off at some point, but it's a kind of a runaway phenomenon. So for what future do you plan time-wise?
Thank you. It's such an interesting question. Thank you. We would like to plan for 2050, but unfortunately, the main plans that we have today, the Climate Change Emergency Plan in Barcelona and Coastal Plan in Barcelona, work with 10 years. Mainly, for example, with what we think in management tools and the promenade, but we consider the information in a more long terms, but we work with 10 years more or less. Although the cycles, the Netherlands talk about 6 years. In Barcelona government, it's every 4 years. So for us, it's a huge achieve to have plans that think about 10 years long. We know it's not enough. We want to study and to plan. That's why we, the Barcelona Beach Expert Group, think about the future in 30, 50 years long, and we need to open that kind of exercise, but now we are working with 10.
Maybe just comment briefly that in line with what Lucia just said, I find that the horizon of interest for many policymakers and for coastal engineers and people like that is much, much shorter than we think as climate scientists. An example from aquaculture, if we say, well, what do you need to know about the future of aquaculture? You need to know how many harmful algal blooms there are going to be in 2050, and the guys who are involved in issuing the licenses for these activities will tell you that they get to see that license every 6 years, and they can change the conditions of that license every 6 years. So they don't need a horizon out to 2050. It's helpful, but they need to know what's going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years, which very much ties in with what Lucia just said about Barcelona. And it's the same in even critical infrastructure, much shorter timescales than I expected when I started looking at this in detail, to be truthful.
I mean, I would love to hear from Quirijn, because building a dike infrastructure is, you know, that's so much money and effort, and
Yeah.
you want to make sure that it's not too low or redundant in 10 years.
Hopefully not. My answer would be that we actually use different timescales, and depends a lot on what you aim to do. So the national strategy, that has a timescale of 100 years. So, and actually it's devising strategies that should be able to cope with the range up till 1.20 meters in 2100. So that's on the strategy level. For long-term spatial planning, for instance, already since the 90s, spatial planning reservations, at least at the coast, they were for, depending on the area, up to 2 meters of sea level rise. But that's not to act on it, but to make sure there's at least the opportunity to act later on. But for many dikes and flood defenses, we only use 50 years, because that's not based on the most probable sea level rise, but based on the economical, basically optimization, because you know in 50 years we will be redoing the system over again. So basically it's either economical, so long-term higher levels of sea level rise, short-term lower, but that's not because we think the world stops in 2050.
If you don't mind, I would also say a few words about the Black Sea. So for us, this question seems to be very provocative. You know, we used to plan for 10 years, and that was related to the Black Sea Strategic Action Plan, which would be normally developed for the 10 years. But as with what is happening in the region, at the moment we are not talking about any planning anymore. And we would rather try to adapt not climate change policy, but try to adapt, you know, and monitor and eliminate the consequences of the military actions in the region which are happening at the moment. So next week, the Black Sea Commission would meet for the first time since February and decide on the fate of the Black Sea. So that's why I wouldn't speak for 10 years now. I would speak for something for shorter period. Thank you for the question.
Yeah, thank you, Bart van Urk. I don't think that Thorsten meant to provoke you with this question. I think but your answer is really spot on. I would say in this context.
I didn't mean
no. But I understand the context.
Provoke,
no.
But you know, it's
yes.
provoked.
No, we
yeah.
totally understand that position. But a question to you and also to Glenn. Glenn, you made specifically a reference to that there is 41 counties that need to develop an adaptation plan. And you also alluded to the fact that at these counties, there is not always the sea level rise expertise. And I can imagine that maybe that also applies well to any interface, and maybe also for the Black Sea. You could elucidate on that as well for the Black Sea. So what does that mean for say the knowledge hub, say, assessment report? What does it take for you to make it also workable for your mission to bring it across to your stakeholders?
I think that's a great question, Bart. You know, we need to maybe act as the translators between, say, the knowledge hub and what emanates from the knowledge hub and the people who need the information on the ground. A quick example, we have what they call a climate action regional office. It's where several municipalities gather together to provide climate information to the people in several counties. And most of the time, the expertise is not scientific at all. It's people who've come from administrative roles and other roles. And one of the challenges then is that they then have to go and speak to the public about sea level rise and about other risks. So I think our job as scientists, this isn't exactly the question you asked me, but just to give you an idea of the approach, I think our mission should be to translate what comes from the hub, the sea level hub, and put that into plain speaking for the people who need it in these very localized environments. And I think that's as much as we can do. You know, there are many, many different tiers of knowledge that we need to deliver in. And what we found, for example, are things like infographics actually make a big difference. So they don't want to know whether it's 3.6 or 3.8 millimeters per year. They want to know, you know, broad brushstrokes, how can I prepare my county for what comes next? And I think we have to tailor our information so we can act as brokers or translators that take maybe what's quite complex information in the knowledge hub and turn that into actionable information at the county level and municipality level.
Could I also contribute a bit? You know, for the Black Sea, we have very good scientific base in the region, and there are people dealing with all these so-called climate change indicators. But at the same time, I said our challenge as a regional sea convention was to introduce the climate change and also its consequences to all our documents. So at the moment, we have a bunch of documents that should be developed, and then, you know, in order to introduce the climate change properly, because, you know, when the convention was drafted 30 years ago, the climate change was not on the agenda. So we have now many things to do where the hub could really help us, and one of these issues is update of our strategic action plan, update of our Black Sea integrated monitoring and assessment program, update of our reporting templates for annual reporting of the Black Sea countries, and also all our regional commitments with all other partners, like MOU with UNEP-MAP that I already mentioned. So we have a bunch of issues where, you know, on our agenda now, and where the knowledge hub could be also of very good use for us. I hope I answered your question.
Perfect, thanks a lot. Yeah.
Okay, then the next question, please.
Well, first of all, a comment, I think, to Iryna. I think our community is really ready to support the Black Sea, which is in a very critical situation. So it will be very important for us to feel how, I mean, to understand how we can contribute, maybe, for instance, with climate downscaling, which I think is definitely missing in the region. Then an easier question, what about citizen science or community science? Especially for Lucia, I mean, how much the monitoring of citizens with maybe low-cost sensors can help them, can help the community, the cities, to involve citizens into the adaptation strategy, or maybe even may increase awareness, for instance.
Thank you very much. In fact, this point is regarded with one of the projects that we have in the strategic Barcelona coastal plan. We work with science with the city, and we have several universities and research centers working together with citizens, with taking data, collaborating. It's social science, but it's really, really useful, not only for make an education process, but also for the science. So they feel that they contribute to the city, and it's really useful. And that links with one of my ideas for my wish list from today is that the assessment, that report that the Sea Level Rise Knowledge Hub wants to have next year also have some tools, some communication tool that involves the population and help us to translate all your data and all your information to something that aware for the people, that understand what the situation is. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we have time for one more question. Bart, you have a...
Okay,
then it's yours.
Thanks. Another question for Quirijn. You were mentioning the interesting topic to highlight, say, methodologies for impact assessment. Do you mean, say, sea level rise consequence impacts, or do you mean impacts of adaptation measures, or can you be a bit more specific what kind of impacts you refer to?
Yeah, I meant the first. So sea level rise impact assessments on society. In the end, you need to do a lot of calculations, and as highlighted in the Netherlands, in the end, we act on risks. So you need to have a calculation from sea level rise towards, in our case, flood risks at a certain area. And you will see that in many places there are localized, highly developed models for that. And I would think that it would be very valuable to share these kind of calculation methods. So and to make a link between risks and sea level rise. And it needs to be localized because the Dutch strategy will not be the preferred one in Germany and not the preferred one in Belgium, etc. But that doesn't matter. It's not about the calculation method. It's about the routines and the thinking and the conceptual thinking behind it.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, so I would like to thank our panel for all the for sharing with us your adaptation experience and the priorities that you have. Also very interesting to hear the experience from different sectors, different levels. Also that it's not just sea level rise, but pollution has impacts from more broadly climate change. And thanks for all the seeds of thought for... Oh, and the 10, yeah. So firstly, thank you for all we took notes for the assessment report, what would be helpful for you to have in there. And I would like to close this panel discussion with your statements, like in 10 seconds, the key message that you would like everyone to take home. And this time I would like to start online with Iryna.
Thank you, Gundula. In one sentence, I would like to emphasize that the sea level rise is still a very cross-cutting issue, and it should be addressed at all different levels. And here, the Knowledge Hub can be a very good instrument to help to address these issues. That's it.
Thank you. Quirijn?
Yeah, I wrote down that for me the objective for the Knowledge Hub would be informed decision making as an ultimate goal, and then more importantly based on shared facts and insights. It's not so much about the facts, but if they are actually shared by people here and the ones who are actually make the decisions.
I had a similar idea to Quirijn, sharing ideas. I learned about 20 different ways to visualize climate data while I was here over the last 2 days, and lots of things that we can do better in our own backyard. And I think the Knowledge Hub as a way to share these ideas and to continue to promote the sharing of ideas between people, particularly around things like visualization and how you communicate the sea level rise message. I think that could be really important.
Okay, well, I will end by saying just that sea level rise is a fact. This is something that, from the point of view of the post, we have to recognize. So it is time for action, and particularly it would be interesting to be able to learn from experiences in other countries and be prepared for the next adaptation measures.
And just to contribute something more that could help to have regional predictions, not only global ones. Maybe it would be useful to have some guide of recommendations, not only to focus on the impacts, but always recommendations of local management, on management in the areas. And just the last one is to thank you, because with all that information you provide technicals from local areas to have more strength to the internal reports that finally go to the people that decide. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Yeah.